We are live. Good evening, Zakal, Bonjour, and Namaste to all my participants, to all people who are watching this session today. I hope everybody is safe and fine, and thank you so much for joining in today. This is great excitement to bring another exciting series to for all of you. I'm Ashish Banka, National President of HR Sampark, your host for the evening. And HR Sampark team welcomes everybody for this inaugural episode of Knowlogy Karwaan. We thank IES Management College and Research Center for being the knowledge partner in supporting the session. Today, while we take this forward, the concept light behind that will take up some industries and, we'll unveil more about it. So while Knowledge Karma will focus on industry and the discussion will of the current industry practices, employment opportunities, and also guiding industry. So this is what our thought process of creating this Knowledge Karwa, a unique session to transfer and share knowledge through specialist guidance. HR Sampark have taken a lot of initiatives. We are spread across Mumbai, Delhi, and Calcutta, over 400 members. We have also currently created a job group in Telegram. Social media link is available for everybody to join. I thank all the 800 people who have joined, and we are focusing to provide at least 100 opportunities on a daily basis to all the members. Our first inaugural episode is led by renowned academician, supply chain expert, Professor Deepak Ganachari. We are extremely privileged, honored to have you, sir, on this series, and it's our privilege to be there. And participants, Mr. Deepak will be our guide teacher on everything related to supply chain. An interesting topic. A brief about Professor Deepak for all of you. Professor Deepak is a B Mechanical from Karnataka University and NMS in Marketing from Mumbai University. He was associated with Fiat, Ford, Automat India at leadership positions. He was associated with Satyam Computer Services and managed esteemed clients like Reliance Petroleum, Emirates Airlines as project manager. He was based in abroad with Tech Mahindra and led the pre-sales for the consulting enterprise solution division for Mahindra Satyam for IMEA. Currently, he is associate professor with IES Management College and Research Center in Mumbai for supply chain. Professor Deepak is dynamic, high caliber, cross-functional expertise person, coming with, proven ability in business process transition, planning, execution, comprehensive business and IT strategies to achieve organization goals and objectives. Over 16 years of solid industry experience and then 8 years of education experience. Something which we'll all need to look out for and learn from his expertise. But friends, before we deep dive more about SCM under the guidance of Professor Deepak, I'll try to give a brief snapshot about supply chain industry for all of you. Backed by technology-driven transformation, the logistics sector in recent years has emerged as a leading contributor to the economy as well as major employment generator. Logistics sector in India is estimated to be a $200 billion industry with a contribution of over 14% to India's GDP. The post-COVID economic transition has further boosted the growth of the sector while accelerating a digital transformation across logistics chain from warehousing to supply chain management and right to the last mile delivery. Interestingly, the pandemic and its aftermath have served the transform of the logistics sector right from supporting sector to an essential one. With the growth of e-commerce penetrating down to smaller towns, a large number of business shifting to online selling, the demand for efficient logistics has surged over the past year. This has also given a major push for value addition, automation, resource optimization, digitalization, adoption of best practices for logistics space. The logistics and supply chain market is expected to touch whooping $307 billion by the end of 2021. Certain emphasis with the sector has laid is emphasis on cold chain, affordable road transport accelerated the growth, sustainable practices which will be implemented, and adoption in technology in terms of AI, ML, and big data, which all these have really helped the industry to take a surge, and also in terms of friends to see it from an angle where it becomes an, as I said, an essential from just available one. And I thank Professor Deepak for taking us through this enlightenment journey, because this sector I personally believe has a lot of potential and which should be explored over the period of time. Before we move move ahead, so we'll keep this format in a question answer session. I have gathered some questions from all of you, and Professor Deepak has helped to narrate some questions which can help you all to understand this better, because our understanding will help us to take better decision making. So, sir, thank you so much for giving your time out, and we are truly honored to have you. My first
Thank you.
question
Thank you, Ashish.
open this session, and while we have been discussing over a month into this, and whatever I could learn immensely from you, spread it across to the other people. So, sir, there is a myth, people very seldom chain and logistics. So my first question to you, for us like laymen, what is the difference between a supply chain and a logistics, sir?
Okay. Uh, okay. First and foremost, Ashish, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity. You've spoken a lot in terms of how exciting the area is. Yes, you're to the true sense, it's very dynamic. It's full of challenges because change is something which is constant here, and that is something with the current situations as things are changing with the introduction of technology. There's a lot of things happening, and that's why I think it becomes a very interesting arena, as well as one of the what you would say a propellant to boost economy, as well as in terms of all the benefactors. So first and foremost, as you asked, I think I should refer to an anecdote some time ago. In terms of, I had this colleague of mine in one of the institutes who was a supply chain as well as a logistics personnel, and he was a faculty, a very senior guy, but he had come from the uh, defense forces, and he had a very different approach in terms of teaching. And usually we used to just catch up on some time or the other, and this is exactly the question I posed to him. Not that what's the difference, but in terms of ये हो क्या रहा है? Like, this is years back I'm talking of. And he very bluntly put, he said, let me give you an example of the defense forces. Defense forces typically has logistics. So when they say logistics, there could be a certain thing in a vehicle moving in from Kanyakumari to, say, Delhi or Kashmir, and you would have various schedules, various defense forces loading, unloading goods at various point in time. However, given that schedule, it just works like clockwork, because that's what defense forces are all about. I mean, a driver is to be there for a change, the driver will be there. I mean, nobody asks that question. So there is that link which you see across is not needed, because activities just happen. This is a very simple way to understand that they really may not look at supply chain in terms of the way it would be. They would look at in terms of just purely logistics. And that is where there has been a paradigm shift. When I talk of just logistics, logistics is a subset of supply chain. And logistics just looks at in terms of physical movement and planning and controlling and execution of goods, storage of goods, as well as in terms of right from the point of origin or till the customers, and basically in terms of trying to fulfill customer satisfaction. Whereas supply chain is more elaborate in nature, it encompasses lots and lots. Basically, it is involving all the processes and linking up the organization, and linking up not only the organizational processes but the organizations associations. That is, it could be used for resource acquisition, manufacturing, inventory management, product portfolio management, demand management, supply or procurement management, and sales and operations management. These are the things that encompass into supply chain. So it is more end-to-end enabler, which looks at real-time information for better planning, as well as in terms of prioritizing based on customers' requirements, and ensure speedy deliveries and improve customer satisfaction. That is the reason you would see that logistics is more in terms of tactical activity, whereas supply chain initiatives would be something which is ongoing, and it be on a long-term basis, which defines the way the organization works across. I think I've been able to try to demystify, because as you see, it contains a lot of various areas. Yes.
Done, sir. I think going forward from here, we will use we will, as an audience, as an voice of an audience, we will promise you as a teacher that we will use the terminologies at the right place going forward now. So our
Okay.
understanding is so this we will do. So moving forward, in terms when you have emphasized that logistics is a tactical uh, in terms of activity, what do you think, what are the elements and processes involved in a logistics? Because why I asked specifically for logistics, because even when I narrated a brief in terms of information about the supply chain, even in all web, in Google or in WhatsApp, or whenever people talk about, we have understood from you that supply chain is more of in terms of a broader picture, and logistics is a subset of that supply chain. This is the same way which I can relate to an HRM, where human resource management is the function and the activity
Absolutely.
comes as payroll, employee engagement, all these. But sir,
Yeah.
when we hear about this in Google or in social media or in any other platform which we talk about, logistics word is overpowering the supply chain word. And that is why most of the people, when they've asked questions also, they have put logistics industry. They have not put supply chain industry. So my question to for them is echoing their voice. What are the elements and processes involved in logistics?
Ashish, actually, I don't disagree with you, because you may hear many of them saying, "Where do you work?" "I work in supply chain." The moment supply chain, it is right from resource acquisition till the product is being distributed. That's the entire chain. And that is where supply chain is more governed by processes. That is where it's very difficult to imagine them, because it is the underlying areas. Good in terms of what you are talking about. I think over this conversation, what we are having also, people may be intrigued by various terminologies, at the same time, various domains, and that can help them to understand in terms of how vast the area is. To answer specifically to your question in terms of elements, I think there are five key elements. One is storage and warehouse activities and material handling activities. This is more in terms of storage of whether it is incoming goods or materials which are required for production, or it could be in terms of moving out goods. So this is the first element. Second one is packaging and unitization. When I say packaging, everybody understands, but typically there is a whole lot of effort that goes in terms of logistics packaging. That is to ensure that you create units, as in pallets, which you must be seeing. Everyone sees containers moving on the roads, vehicles carrying containers. And what are these basically? They are basically, you make a larger unit from small boxes, and so that it's easily measurable, it is secured, safe, and at the same time, I can carry and optimize much larger amount of numbers. And that is where logistics packaging as well as unitization, that is how do I make them. You may see various cartons of boxes, whether it's something you get from Amazon on an e-commerce platform, or whether you get any package. The packaging has a certain dimension so that it helps in terms of making them into units. The third is most critical again in terms of money, that is inventory management, because everybody, I'm sure, would appreciate if I have more inventory, it's sinking up funds. If I have less inventory, that means I'm basically not able to produce the way I would want to. And that is where, in terms of maintaining that right balance of goods, would be very critical. That's my third element, that is inventory. The fourth is obviously how do I move the goods across? That's transportation. That is more in terms of how I move goods from one point to another, and by what mode, what would be the cost, what would be the time duration, and how safe will be my consignment, and so on and so forth. So that is the fourth element that would come under logistics. And the fifth is more vital, that is in terms of information and control. I need to understand where things are, what's happening. I'm sure a small glimpse into that is today we order something on any of the e-commerce portals. We are more interested to know whether the goods have left the place, where are they, when are they being delivered, and so on and so forth. Just to give a glimpse in how it interfaces with the customer. But at the same time, it's mighty important for organizations to understand what quantities are moving where, how much is there in various zones, how much are going to be retailed, and so on and so forth. So information will help me to control the flow, and that is where these are the five critical elements. The reason I put them across because if people can connect it, that every terminology which I use is again an industry by itself. So you can understand it's a culmination of so many sectors which come together in terms of just defining logistics itself. Yes, I hope Ashish that clarifies in terms of the elements what are there across for logistics.
Then, sir, I think you used a certain another thing which was important for us, which we helped to gain knowledge is when we use logistics, we generally only synonym it with transport, whereas you again helped us to understand that transport is again a subset of logistics. So it's only a subset of logistics. So in terms of
Right.
process, when we understand about logistics as a process, generally when we order goods now, since most of us as millennials who are using Amazon, Flipkart, and various other e-commerce websites platform, but they also go back and take the support of logistics in terms of transportation of goods. So one
Absolutely.
of my friends who works in e-commerce industry. So I will do. We have a liberty here since we are discussing industry as a whole. So we can use any other names of companies and all. So there is nothing. So like Flipkart, taken an example, they have their own uh, logistics partner. They call it logistics partner e-cart services. So they deliver through e-cart. When we talk about GeoMart, they have a tie-up with Grab, who provides the platform and transfer of goods. But they use the terminology logistics. But today we understand that they are using only the transport services of the goods. They are not doing logistics because warehouses are owned by people. But in terms of sir, simplify the process of logistics. If you have to, brief all of us in a nutshell, how would you like to, in terms of want to enlighten us in terms of process of logistics?
Okay. Before I go to process, you triggered something else when you said in terms of uh, there are certain entities like Flipkart which has a transportation arm which handles the movement of goods. There are certain companies which outsource in terms of their transportation to somebody else
Correct,
based
sir.
on what is their criteria. Everyone knows about Domino's. Domino's has their own transportation. That
Yes,
means
sir.
they have their own people delivering across because one of their brand promise or one of their brand communication is in terms of related to deliveries. So it is more in terms of based on the corporate identity what they develop. You would see in terms of supply chains also being defined as well as then the logistics also gets defined that way. And we can talk about that subsequently, and that is where you can look at in terms of everyone would have different ways of looking at this, but by and large the overlying processes what you may look at, again there would be typically supply or procurement management. How do I get the goods, as well as inventory management? These these are key processes. Then have something to do with material logistics, production logistics, and material management. Once goods come into the plant, I have basically in terms of having to move across within the plant, do across the transformation, and look at in terms of the production part also. The third element is storage and distribution planning and transportation. That is where I send finished goods out across into the markets where I move them in terms of physically, then store them into warehouses, then further go into the next cycle to reach slowly and slowly till the customer endpoints. Last but not the least, the reverse logistics or product returns is again one more critical process in terms of looking at how the logistics works, where there could be compulsive processes where goods come back, that is typically empties. You may look at a simple example of a gas cylinder which goes back to the plant to get it refilled. That's a very simple example of a return or reverse logistics. At the same time, today we see a lot of things happening on the e-commerce platform where you can give back the products within a stipulated period of time, and where I have to again look at in terms of the modalities of moving the product across back. So these are typically the key processes what one can see across in the logistics arena basically. I hope I've answered the.
Yes, sir. I think I could gauge, a certain audience has asked another question, which also comes synonymous. What questions you have given? Types of logistics. So while my understanding also goes back, in terms of inbound, outbound, and reverse logistics, which is generally a type of logistics, and generally now when people will return in Amazon or Flipkart defective, they will understand this is a part of reverse logistics. But sir, again, a question triggers to me, and you correctly pointed out a point where the kind of logistics a company wears, the outfit, generally defines. But sir, you mentioned earlier that transport is a part of logistics, and logistics is a subset of supply chain management. But when we talk about uh, any return of goods, even when we get on mobile or anywhere, so they write logistics. They don't like transport. Any reason why the word transport is only synonymous with trailers and logistics is a more sophisticated term, a more white collar kind of term? Is that
No. Um, Now, in fact, there are different areas to it. I can connect something what you said earlier also, which I missed out in terms of apart from how you are doing the movement of goods, as well as how you are storing them and how you are distributing them. One more critical item is who is doing it. Am I supposed to be doing it? Am I the person who is to do everything? Or should I leave it to some experts to do it? And let me focus on my core. Suppose I'm a manufacturing company. What would I want to do? Should I bother about manufacturing, or should I look at in terms of where is the demand? How do I fulfill it? Or should I get into transporters and things like that? So there's emergence of third-party logistics or companies which are dedicated to do these kind of activities, who are professionals, who will do planning, who will do move goods across for you, who will create space for storage, maybe on temporal basis or permanent basis, as and when you need it, and go about doing structuring. That is where, in terms of how I may use this kind of activities. But predominantly, when I'm a simple example, when you said you're returning a good, there is certain information that is related to customer, the date of pickup, the consignment, some reference, and when it was delivered, and what is the reason the product is being returned. All these information bytes go across to communicate to various entities, whether it could be the seller or whether could be to, in terms of the product is damaged en route, then it is to the transporter and various elements, or whether it was a wrong order itself. That means while the product was being, the fulfillment center was doing it, did they rightly put them across, or did they basically put a wrong consignment? So there is a whole lot of things which go across into that, and that is the reason it cannot be just transport. Transport is just a small enabler, and I'm sure, Ashish, I'm sure what the reason you're asking, because in India, you'll see that majority of the players, you'll see that movement of goods is basically I get a vehicle, I try to negotiate rates, and I send a consignment. It's mostly a tactical relationship, and I'm looking at a L1 kind of a quote, a lowest quote, and that's about. But when I look at all these kind of parameters, then It would be a logistics activity which I'm doing across.
Done, sir. Thank you so much. I think, again, as I did a promise on the first question, we'll use the words at the right place going forward. So, you used a very interesting term, FC, Fulfillment Center. For my audience who have heard this term first time, I share my experience of this word before I land up to the question to sir. FC was the first term I got to use during my stint in GeoMart, where I had visited one FC in Bhiwandi. And I had asked this question to sir also, but the response I will like for everybody to hear because this is very interesting response. So for me, a warehouse was where stuffs are stored, where the stuffs can be taken away, then they are distributed, landed up into the vehicles and sent it across, and whole lot of documentation which is being done. There are also some sub warehouses which are created as sorting centers where entire stuff comes. They are distributed. Some are sent to warehouse, and some are directly sent to the end users. FC is the new word in India, sir. FC. So if you can help us to enlighten about FC and how does it relate or irrelate to a warehouse, sir?
Now, Ashish, you earlier started defining with something again which you did not ask, I'm telling you, is a DC, a distribution center. So you have warehouses, you have fulfillment centers, you have distribution centers. You may hear these words across. Walmart uses its DCs, and in somebody, Amazon uses its fulfillment centers, and these kind of things. But just to demystify, a simple way, when I use the terminology warehouse, it means I'm going to store the goods for a longer period of time, for a longer duration, and it is a buffer place. It is a place where I'm using it as a buffer, and it need not be closer to customers. It has to be somewhere it makes economical sense for me, and I can store in certain conditions for a longer duration time. Whereas a fulfillment center is somewhere the goods are coming in based on certain orders, and they are shipped after doing the packing, labeling, or whatever activities that need to be carried out, and moved out from the center in a very short duration of time. That's a fulfillment center. The fulfillment center is a feeder to the customers. Whereas at the same time, when you talk of a distribution center is a transit hub. You said just now that you saw that goods were coming someplace. You may get it in a bulk, then you break that bulk into smaller, and you may use different modes of transport. You may use a bigger vehicle, or you may use a smaller tempo or a minivan to distribute based on the kind of quantity. So that is typically a distribution center would basically be used as a transit hub. A fulfillment center is an ongoing process. That means a fulfillment center almost works 24/7. That is where if I'm getting a product from Amazon, I'm getting it from the fulfillment center. That means those goods have been acquired from some warehouses somewhere of certain sellers, and based on, because there is a order coming, and they are coming and collating at a hub. That hub is a fulfillment center from where the dispatches happen. But if it's my own organization, like I talked of Walmart or maybe IKEA, where the goods come in large numbers and then they move across to certain hubs so that they can start feeding into the geography. Again, in terms of Walmart has a lot of places, and it may come across to a zone, and the zone has a DC, that's a distribution center, and then based on the needs, the goods will be filled into the various stores across. So that is where the terminologies differ based on the way the processes that they manage across. Yes.
Thank you, sir. I think you raised a very important point. And friends, as sir had told, even if we see in all the newspapers or we always say square feet of warehouse. We have never come across where people are saying square feet of DC, square feet of FC, because now it is much clear why the emphasis is given on warehouse of how big it is, because the goods are stored for a longer duration of time. for a fast moving.
Just a small correction. When I talk of warehouses, I don't talk about squares. I talk of cubes. I
Okay.
mean, that's you have to look at in terms of how tall they are, in terms of what that is again an important aspect as to how tall I can store across. So any kind of facilities, the one of the most important criteria is not on the carpet area, but the cubic volume what you get across for storage. So that's typically in terms of when people design across, in terms of the kind of throughput they would require, they would look at in terms of the cubic element in that.
Done, sir. I think thank you so much. I That's the beauty of having a teacher on board. We will be rectified at every step, and I take that as a learning. Sir, very interestingly, when
You're on mute, Ashish. You're
no, so yes, sir. So sorry, I came. So while when we talk about all these terminologies of warehouse related, there is also an aspect of transport. So when we talk about a heavy vehicle, a light vehicle, the types of transport, when we and we when we see transport for us as layman, we if we go somewhere, we have a big car, a small car, then we have seen those big trailers, containers. So types of transport. How do you help us to understand in terms of
okay. When it comes to movement of goods, typically in terms of uh, uh, logistics of goods, because you have people logistics as well. I mean, you have people logistics as well as goods logistics, anything that is moving across. But typically, in terms of when you're looking at material logistics, where you're moving goods across, we use variety of transports. I'm just going to talk about in terms of what you see across in our country, in terms of the references what we have. We have typical roadways. You see trucks moving around on the roads, and typically that is one of the biggest chunk of transportation that we have across. And there are larger emphasis in terms of the current budget also in terms of outlays for almost 11,000 kilometers more of roads, as well as a huge expenditure being built on the road outlays, because that is something one of which takes you from door to door. However, it's not the cheapest, but it is definitely one of the faster modes of transport. The second is the railway transportation, where you move goods through railways. And but again, of late, you have seen containers moving across, and I'm sure people must have seen video clips during the last pandemic lockdowns where goods were moved through what they call them as freight corridors, and you saw long trains going across. And that is of late companies like Container Corporation, which typically deals with containers moving on the rails. They are moving in a big way in terms of going across for rail transportation, because again rail transportation has a challenge in India, because any idea in terms of, Ashish, what would be the average speed of railway transportation in India?
no,
You
sir,
said
no wild
you said I'm
guesses.
a teacher, so I thought let me ask you across, make it more. You will be surprised to see that the rail transportation, the average speed in India is about 20 to 25 kilometers per hour. So that is where you'd see that it's mighty slow, because we have lots of emphasis on passenger trains and less emphasis on the goods trains. And that is where you'll see that railway transportation is one of the cheapest, but we have challenges there. And the answers are coming across with the freight corridors which are being coming in, and those will help us to move goods much faster and more economical. So that's the railways is the second way. The third is waterways. Waterways, we have very less of waterways. We are not using our rivers for transportation except for a couple of them. And but there is a huge government initiative which is known as the Sagarmala project, where they're trying to link up in terms of transportation through domestic waterways and increase transportation. So that is waterways which can do wonders in terms of again cost as well as volumes. But globally, you will see that everybody sees in terms of ships being the largest transporter of goods across the world. and that is where, in terms of where I can move bulk much cheaper and in a reasonable amount of time. The fifth one is typically in turn, the fourth one is typically air transportation. Everybody understands, but again, perishables, something to do with, in terms of, high value items, I can use airways, because airways is the fastest but the most costliest. But nevertheless, since the time duration is very less in terms of the air, much safer, the insurance costs are much lower, and that is, one would see a lot of these critical items or high value items, perishables, they move across by air, because it's all those factors which contribute. The last one, which is interesting, is pipelines. We don't have pipelines as many, but there are few pipelines which transport across. Companies like Gale have set up their own pipelines which are moving across a lot of elements there in terms of natural gas as well as various activities. So pipelines is a transportation process. In fact, you will be surprised to see some companies as well as certain hospitals use pipeline networks within their own facilities to move goods, so that it is much faster and at the same time it's more reliable. So, to basically categorize transportation, these are the typical five means of transportation one can look at in logistics also, in terms of, you asked in terms of what is transportation, but again, transportation has a wider area in terms of, uh, again, different elements there, different industries there. Yes.
Thank you, sir. I think, going forward, when we all understand specifically what happens, this kind of knowledge not only, you know, enlightened us, but also in terms of our understanding towards the consumer business, because we all have been at very end one of the receiving ends. Either we have been a buyer or we have been a seller. But
Yes.
these terminologies we do not. Very importantly, sir, a question comes out of the context when we talk about courier. We send our personal courier, and we use various companies like FedEx, Blue Dart, Delivery, and other companies. We always go back, and when we use that particular DTDC is the one when we frequently use that. Speed Post is there, India Post is there. When we go back and we use how we are sending this, in terms of costing, is there a difference between the cost when we use it for personal goods through air? Because since you mentioned it is the most economical and easier in terms of time saving, but we cannot send everything through air. It has its limitations as a whole as well. But do you think which one is the most economical of the all, and which one is the most expensive out of all? Sir?
The most expensive is definitely air, because air, the cost per unit for transportation is very high, but at the same time, the insurance cost is much lesser, because it is in the transit for a shorter period of time. However, in terms of economics wise, in domestic, I would say railways are the most cost effective. Internationally, it is the sea routes which are most cost effective in terms of the kind of cargo they would carry in terms of quantities. So that makes a lot of sense.
Done, sir. Thank you. I also mentioned some of the companies. So, would you like to help the audience to understand who are the market leaders? When we've spoken so much about last 30 odd minutes in logistics, supply chain, and in terms of transport, who are the India's market leaders, sir?
Okay, when you're talking of logistics companies, there are again, based on the kind of work they do. I sometime back I talked about 3PLs, third-party logistics providers. They do all end-to-end solutions, but there are certain players who do niche activities. That is typically, maybe they're experts in doing warehouses, they are experts in doing transportation, or there could be certain areas. And again, there are certain companies which are doing, as you sometime back mentioned about couriers, where I'm doing couriers, parcels, or goods. Typically, when they link up to the e-commerce side, you would see a lot of these companies from courier as well as what would say uh, the e-commerce companies. Globally, you can hear about UPS, FedEx, you have DHL, you have Union Pacific. These are some of the international players. When I look at domestic, typically in the logistics segments, I have companies like Distripark, Gateway Distripark. Then we have TCI, that is Transport Corporation of India. Then we have VRL Logistics. We have Aegis Logistics, typically does into bulk as well as liquid logistics. Mahindra Logistics, All Cargo Logistics, Container Corporation of India. These are some of the big names I'm talking of. When you're looking at typical courier and e-commerce, again, you have a lot of fulfillment guys, like you mentioned right in the beginning about e-cart, or you have delivery, Guppy, you have Ecom, FedEx, Blue Dart. There are a lot of companies. These are typically from organized. A word of caution here, because this industry, the reason, this is my personal belief, why it hasn't geared up so much is because there's a huge incidence in the unorganized sector and very less emphasis. It's slowly taking roots into the organized way, and there are a lot of organized players, and people will start realizing, because the entry level was much more lower, and there are a lot of people who can easily enter into this industry, and that is where even a small time transporter becomes a logistics guy, and that is where the confusion to the common man, what's happening, is it logistics or is it transportation? But I think with these kind of players coming in, a lot of technology being used, I think there'll be greater clarity that will come across.
That's
Yes.
I think so. Most of the people now will flock to all these companies to join, because the
Yes.
kind of discussion which we are having, it feels that the industry has so much of potential, both for employment and digitalization. Coming
Yes.
back to the question of digitalization, sir, that is very close to your heart. I have seen you in depth talking about it, and heard your in terms of your experience, which is so international. You have done so much, because we generally think the technology comes from abroad and they use more. You have worked in IEME. Sir, in this segment, whether I call it supply chain, we call it logistics, or I call it transport, digitalization in India specifically, we are more talking about it from a post pandemic point of view, or maybe in pandemic point of view, because it has been a thrust and there has been a need of technology driven initiatives. So process driven initiatives were always there, those are still there, and those will keep on evolving over a period of time. But technology driven initiatives, if they are used by a company, exponentially increases the business flow. And that is what we in HR also do, use technology to build a capacity and capability in the organization. Sir, if you can help us, I know this is a big topic, so it's difficult for us to even cover in end to end. But maybe in terms of key technology-driven initiatives which the industry has taken, and where has been the maximum impact, if we can, know a bit from you, sir.
Okay. When you talk about technology-driven initiatives, uh, it's not only the current pandemic or COVID-19 pandemic what you are seeing. It has only propelled us to quickly shift online from an offline mode. And but supply chain practices are typically disruptive in nature. Things keep on changing, and there is globalization happening across, and you see rapid changes. The pandemic actually got an opportunity to redefine goals for supply chains and basically become more proactive in their usage of technology. And that is where you are right in terms of people were using technology for enabling, as well as in terms of what I can say, in terms of automating. I mean, but there is a different level of automation that has come across with the current scenario, where you need to be agile in your planning and you need to be future ready. That means I should be adaptable to change based on any kind of changes which happen in the marketplace. So that is where technology driven changes which can change in terms of the way we do business. However, before I get into that, let me tell you that there is a certain resistance in this industry. In fact, almost a survey says that almost 39-40% of logistics companies are averse to using technology because they don't have on-site technology expertise. That means people who are using these kind of technology, they are not trained enough, and they have a huge resistance to that kind of a change. They are comfortable using those traditional practices, and which are actually scuttling the growth and development. And at the same time, in terms of some technologies, like you mentioned right in the beginning, in terms of AI, where I'm trying to use today, AI is being used in terms of trying to adapt to drone deliveries. And there is certain challenges in terms of to avoid collisions between drones and things like that, where they are still using AI development to go to the next level. At the same time, using Internet of Things, that is IoT, again, these are more in terms of things which are looking at the challenges where I see across. I mean, if I were to just bucket them, where there's amazing amount of the technology interface. The reason I'm trying to convert your answer across to, in terms of, if audience can appreciate that it is logistics is not trucks, buses, dabba moving goods across and so, but it is much more than that. In fact, in terms of the technology space which enables these kind of processes, the first one, typically in terms of use of blockchains, again, we see there's a huge resistance using blockchains. I mean, I can look at in terms of securing data, letting only involved parties in, and process, basically all process and track documentation, as well as in terms of get information about what is happening across through a secured network. But there's a huge resistance for using transparency and having an open environment. I personally believe you can look at in terms of almost a 5% increase in a global GDP. 5 to 10% is easily achievable with the use of blockchains. Second is Internet of Things. This is something which we have seen across, where the recent pandemic, where you're trying to move vaccines as well as medicines, where I can use IoT, typically use sensors for monitoring temperature, humidity, for the goods which are being transported. It could be sensitive cargoes like pharmaceuticals, vaccines, food. These are where I may use a smartphone interface to NFCs, that is near field communication devices like RFID devices and so on and so forth, and look at in terms of providing security to the goods which are moving them across or getting stolen and those kind of things. So a huge area again. The third one, if I were to talk about, I'm just talking about the areas still which are coming up and that can look exciting for people to look at in terms of the scope. Everybody sees those PDAs people use across handheld devices, where every courier guy who comes across does that kind of activity. But the third one on my list would be to talk about virtual reality. Imagine truckers can see on their windscreen in terms of what is the traffic conditions, what are the alternate routes. They can look at in terms of what is the cargo they are carrying, what is the kind of facilities required for loading or unloading the cargo, rather than using a handheld device. Imagine a person, the driver can see on his windshield glass or can have powered glasses. That is typical virtual reality or coming into play. And things like when you said artificial intelligence and machine learning, huge area in terms of when you said all this is, yes, it is all transportation, but in the sense I need to manage this transportation. What kind of vehicles, what kind of volumes, what kind of goods to be loaded, how do I load them across, and how do I do the planning for the routes? Again, this requires some kind of technology. Then the second element under AI and ML would be typically in demand forecasting, freight costing, supplier performance. I'm using suppliers. How are they behaving? How do I adapt to suppliers and basically look at de-risking myself, as well as inventory management. These are all something where a technology-driven AI or typically in terms of machine learning can help us do that. There are companies who are adopting predictive modeling, where they're looking at into the shopper's basket and trying to understand how and when this person is going to buy and be ready to ship the goods to them. And that is these kind of predictive modeling what analytics is taking us to a different level altogether. The next one would be in terms of vehicles itself. We are looking at in terms of vehicles without drivers, in terms of autonomous vehicles, where you can look at in terms of having a platoon of vehicles moving across because they can talk to each other, they can maintain distances, they can avoid collisions, and in fact, there are certain studies which say that they can optimize and reduce cost to almost 30%. I mean, these are more like fairy tales, but this is technology is an area where there is amazing areas of opportunity. You have in terms of robotic process automation, which is coming up in terms of in areas of transport planning as well as customer invoicing. Then everybody has heard of SaaS platforms, software as a service. This is more and more coming into play where people can spend less, get into that kind of a platform, use benefits of a standardized process, and become agile. So these are typically in terms of some of the new dimensions which I feel that companies are moving or evolving. I think the pandemic comes as a blessing that it goes into a next gear and makes them move across.
Thank you, sir. I out of all these, the personally, I feel this session is injustice to know more. The terms which you used, they require each session by session because it's such immensely rich topics, and we are so glad that we could have someone who can give us at least an overview about of it. But personally, I'll connect with you to get more about it because one thing which you were also mentioning while we were having discussions before the session that the companies who have used technology well have grown better.
Yes.
I think that is very important statement which you mentioned because process will take you at a certain level, but to exponentially increase, you need to adapt and embrace technology. That was what you were advising. Sir, in terms when we you mentioned and there's an audience questions while we are also coming to fag end of the session, so I will also start taking audience questions. You mentioned once unorganized sector. We have also used this term many times in our discussion. Audience has come back and asked, Sir, can you please help us? What is unorganized?
Okay. Unorganized sector, very interesting. Typically, I don't know how to draw analogy there. Typically, unorganized sector is there in every walks of life. If I were to just give a simple example, uh, we go to markets with legitimate shops and make purchases. That is the organized sector. You go to a rediwala and buy. That is an unorganized sector. Basically, that's a very simple way I can define, and that is where you have. That is what I mean. The reason I just recollected, when did I mention to you? Yes, when I have two trucks with me or two couple of tempos and I become a logistics operator, and all I can understand is you tell me from where do I pick up goods and where to reach. You have 10 tons or 15 tons of goods, I will load it on 10 tons and I will take it, and that vehicle will go just trying screeching itself through the guards, and it will just go, and the person makes a tactical amount of money. But the moment I'm talking of the organized sectors where you're looking at long-term relationships, we're looking in terms of companies which establish processes for repetitive activities they will be doing and performing the same way. That's typically an organized sector. And that is where it is important. And earlier it was all people, that's what I said. One of the simple was entry barriers. There were very low entry barriers, and anybody could become a driver over a period of years, becomes a supervisor, a manager, and starts managing activities. But today's need of the hour, that's where a lot of MBA programs offer even operations and supply chain, for a simple reason that the industry now needs in terms of people who come with certain amount of common sense, certain amount of understanding, and certain amount of application to use technology as well as processes and try to optimize. And because again, that is one of the challenges, everything being the same, material costs going up, labor costs going up, you need to have supply chain efficiency building up. And that is where you will see that, more and more focus comes on the organized sector. So that is where you may see unorganized sector will be there, but I think it will be more the play for bigger ones to basically look at.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for clarification. I hope the person who asked the question gets the clarity. From us, from an HR standpoint, unorganized days, you are not paying PF, ESIC on time. You are not paying taxes on time. So that's how, from an HR standpoint, we generally synonym it. I will come to my most interesting question of the day, and which is personally my favorite, and you would have guessed that is related to employment. As an HR professional, we always talk about generating more employment. We have seen how people have suffered in this pandemic, with no reasons. Some industries have seen a lot of meltdown. Certain industries, including the industry of supply chain, which has seen a surge and lot of employment has been generated, sir. Lot of audience have asked questions. In the paucity of time, I will take only one of them, which I liked, something which was there. But before I come to that question, sir, employability in this sector generally, when we were discussing and when I read more about it after discussing with you, I found it has immense opportunities for employment for every age group. I also even asked you a question about education.
Yes.
So it has, layer loaders. I have seen in my native in Rajasthan and in Calcutta where people are aged but they can do. So there are loaders, people are drivers, people. So education, age does not fall into, in terms of appearance, does not fall into a kind of structure into this employment. But there are a lot of people who don't require a specialization even to go here in terms of reach up the ladder. So I see it after discussing and reading more about it. It is a stream which is for all. Everybody can take it up. Everybody can grow. So, but what are your views about employability into this supply chain or logistics or transport segment, sir?
If you talk from the bigger perspective, let's talk of only facts. What is the sector currently? You're looking at somewhere around 215 billion US dollars of market, growing at a rate of 10.5% CAGR, and that is where predictions say that it could be one of the largest creator of jobs by 2022. And you have more than 22, 23 million people who are predominantly in the logistics sector itself. And when I was talking of so much of surgeons into the organized sectors, where there are a lot of companies coming with, so I need to do transformation in my manufacturing practices, the way I buy things, procure. So I'm looking at strategic partners and not just going and buying something and coming. So there is a whole lot of relationship building, supplier relationships, then applications which are going to help me both in procurement. You have e-procurement as well as in terms of looking at distribution, that is the sales and operation part. So it is not, you know, it's not right to say that there may be a stagnation, but I personally feel with this disruptive innovations which are happening, which are going to be very positive. And that is where, if I were to just talk of that 14% GDP which is spent on logistics, you will see that a whooping 40% comes from typical transportation. Then you have a typical almost how much, 26% or 4% of that, 4% of GDP or 25%, which is coming from, again, in terms of warehousing practices. So you can understand the companies who are doing warehousing and those kind of things. The third is again similar to percentage is in inventory management. So companies want to plan better inventories, have less and better goods with them. So this all requires people who are professional. They have certain skill sets with them. And that is where I would personally look at all these energies coming together. That is a pure synergy in terms of seeing the job markets. There will be a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of startups. There's a lot of emphasis by government also on technology as well as startups. So you can look at in terms of more and more job opportunities coming there.
That's I think you excited all of us to move into this segment, and specifically, we also understand, sir, that during this pandemic, as a human resource professional, able to guide everybody into this domain over a decade, that if you are there into industry which is growing or which has opportunity to grow, your growth will always be at par with the organization, because industry nowadays it is not only about our role, it is about how organizations grow, and that's why we say the organizations grow, we grow. So in this a leading question to the audience, Akash Ranjan is a student who has asked a question. I will read the exact what is written. Sir, I have one doubt, as I have completed my BTech from production engineering in 2020, want to choose my career in supply chain. Which job profile best suited for production engineer mechanical in supply chain? I came across the information that in supply chain there is a job of only about loading and unloading goods.
I don't know what's his name. You said
Name is Akash Ranjan.
Akash. Uh, don't be disappointed. It's not loading and unloading only what you has a professional supply chain. As I said, supply chain is right from resource procurement, that is buying raw materials, to producing goods is a part of supply chain. And when you talk about your background as a production guy, I'm sure you must have learned subjects of industrial engineering in terms of time and motion study, where you're optimizing in terms of how you work across and bring about. You have talked about waste management or quality management. You're talked about all the Japanese methods of Muda, as well as in terms of how to expedite work, uh, total quality management. These are all some of the practices where companies have to become more productive. And productivity improvement is also part of supply chain, where I optimize my operational cost and reduce cost. I may use certain ways in terms of automation. I may get into a CNC and look at automating a certain part. I may automate a machine material handling system. At the same time, I will have to improve my quality, reduce rejections, bring about productivity. That's also a part of supply chain itself. I need to manage inventory in a much better fashion. I have so many methods to manage inventory, and I have to ensure that I store the best quantities in procurement, store the best quantities in terms of my stores, and use it for production. And my production capacities are based on which I will do my planning, and the other arm would be the demand which comes across. So Akash, uh, be rest that there are ample opportunities where you can look at in terms of moving yourself, whether you want to focus more into technology, you want to focus into quality, you want to focus into managing things, or you want to improve processes. There are dime a dozen opportunities you can look at for them.
Thank you, sir. I think he will hear your advice because it comes from an engineer. So we all know how the engineers. So if I would have said him, he would have not hurt me, but he would definitely listen to you. So we all, while we move on to the very fag end of the discussion, I mean, I'm so glad that in a short period we could gather such information, which many of us, knowingly, unknowingly, intellectuals must be misinterpreting in terms of of our understanding issue of the subject. It is
Yes.
not that we, and the idea is we, this is not that we don't want to, but we never thought we require it and nobody corrected it. So I
Yes.
think this is a good way to bring it across. E-commerce and logistics goes in hand, and we also mentioned few companies, their transport arm. In terms of this, when we mention this marriage, I will take the term marriage, e-commerce and logistics. How do you think that has gone together, and is it good for a e-commerce platform to have its own logistics partner, own logistics arm, or outsource it? So in terms of when we outsource something, is the cost only the factor, or what does an e-commerce company will look if they have to outsource or insource their logistics support? Because logistics without e-commerce will fall flat. That's what we have.
When I do things, two things, Ashish here. When I do things on my own, that's going to be cheaper. If I outsource, it's going to be costlier. A simple thumb rule. However, if there are experts who are going to handle that, and which is their core, and I can use variety of services what those guys can offer, then it is very much better that I go across to and outsource. Because when I talk about, you talked about e-commerce. What is e-commerce? E-commerce is you're doing an online store. But however, those goods have to be moved through a fulfillment center where I have to do inventory management, where I have to do warehousing, where I have to do packaging, maybe labeling, billing, transportation. All those logistics activities have to be done. And I have to be good in all of them if I have to do it on my own. And that is where certain companies have hybrid, as you right in the beginning mentioned about e-cart. They hybrid in terms of a different company, and definitely that company e-cart was performing much better in terms of its operational abilities, in terms of, because they were doing a larger volume of business. So that is where, in terms of, yeah, it is a very that is the emergence of third party logistics. As I said, I wish that more and more companies start adopting these 3PLs, and 3PLs start doing less of only transportation, but start getting into the demand management. I'm a manufacturer. I just sit and manufacture. My logistic arm, basically, the partner goes, assesses what is a demand there, and tells me that this is demand. I remove a product from a certain market. My partner basically ensures that there's no warehouse there, gets the warehouse ready. That means my go-to market is much faster. My marketing strategies can keep on changing dynamically. I mean, that is where you can see that, that marriage, what you said, whether it is very important, I would have a arm which is flexible and which can be modified based on which I can, my strategies of business work. And that makes me agile in terms of, in this kind of times. If you were to see, Ashish, supply chain in the recent times, what happened? You had customers demanding for products which you had never heard of, and companies had to reconfigure products, bring down costs, and logistics operators have to move goods across for goods which you never had a demand. There was no customers, and suddenly you got, whether it was pharmaceuticals or equipment, pharma equipments, or name it, and you had a whole plethora of goods which came across, and I had to adapt my logistics. So it's, I, as a manufacturer or as a trading company, I may not be in a position to do that. So my personal opinion is I should look at experts who have these kind of facilities to move ahead.
Thank you, sir. I think yeah, this is very important because not only from an understanding point of view, there will be many expert people from the industry, and in while we will inform the audience on how we will forego this event coming in coming months, it's very important that our sense of understanding is very important, as you said, and whatever you have said, friends, if you eliminate few of them, everything is so important and so viable in other streams also. If I relate what you are saying in hospitality industry or in telecom industry, it still remains the same. The design principle remains the same of what you are saying. But generally, for after what you have said today, sir, today going forward, one is how do we look upon the people from supply chain industry? Our outlook will also require to be changed as employers. Are we looking them people, as a commodity? Are we looking them as experts? Are we looking them somebody who can bring interventions and bring change to the organization?
Yes.
If we do not, because in hospitality industry, in service industry, in tourism industry, we give maximum emphasis to the people. In banking, we give maximum emphasis to the process. But supply chain is a culmination of everything. So we
Yes.
cannot just give one-sided approach And that is why we see a lot of supply chain professionals, sir. When we, I went ahead, I will take this liberty to share. I went ahead and joined various logistics groups in social media. And when I joined them, the kind of post which I saw, there was nothing intellectual about it. Either they were selling warehouses or they were saying we have a 12 pass loader or unloader vacancy. So I am saying there is, because that is why 40% of our 14% of GDP comes from logistics. It cannot be a one-way dimension. So I
Yes.
think this requires people, and specifically I take that owners as HR professionals to clear that image of employment as well. Because I believe most of the companies which we mentioned are such renowned model employer companies. They will be doing everything correct, right from supporting their employees to giving social security to their employees. But just that social recognition is not there, and people also are not educated much, so they might be feeling little in terms of not very confident to come on the foreface when we talk about. While we understand, sir, I also take this as a point where lot of misconceptions, theories, and lot of other elements which have been cleared. While we end this, we want to end this session, do a suitable the future and challenges of logistics and supply chain in India. When we look at it, we have always shown the audience the brighter side of it. Post pandemic, what has happened? So whatever we have discussed over an hour had always been on a very bright side of it, and which is so encouraging. But sir, it's also important as professional to do look at both the coins, both the sides of a coin. So, in terms of if we do a SWOT analysis, sir, of this industry itself, we have spoken about a lot of opportunities. We have spoken in terms of strengths. We would like to focus upon threats and weakness of this industry, sir. If you can help us to identify, and also, I will not say in terms of challenge. If we say challenges, what are the remedies also? Because we see you as an expert right from industry as well as an academician. So, what are the remedies, possible remedies of each solution, if you can help our audience to understand?
I will try. I'll try. That's a big one in terms of what you're talking about. If I were to put that holistically, you'll see that some of the challenges are basically more in terms of using the existing logistics infrastructure itself, in terms of how can I maximize the logistics infrastructure. What do I have? Typically looking at in terms of the way transportation I do, or how do I do my warehouse activities. One of the other things in terms of delivery of goods, we have seen in terms of there is so much of errors. I'm sure you're also aware of the companies which are doing a lot of investments in terms of trying to pinpoint customers and trying to become efficient in their delivery so that they can do the turnaround much faster. One more interesting and challenging, you will be surprised, we have such a huge road network. We have such a large coastline, but we have very limited international ports. And that is something where you can see in terms of the port connectivity to the national grid, that is your golden quadrilateral and your north south east west corridors. There is a huge gap. The last mile connectivity, that is something which is a huge challenge. There is a lot of outlays which are being made for highway projects and things like that. I think that will help ease out a lot of these bottlenecks, and that will look at in terms of streamlining processes where you can balance across the country. One of the other biggest challenge I feel is the entry level is lower, as you said, very low level employment. But in terms of training them, you are a HR guy, you understand how critical is basically your training and development, the T&D activity, where it has to be constant. And since most of the people are on the field all the time, that training becomes a critical element in terms of use modern methods to train these kind of people and ensure that I can't do anything but try to raise the bar and make them competent enough, make them able to use and adapt systems. So it's like the moment I start using applications, I should go with the confidence that I can convert these kind of or imbibe these kind of skill sets to my people also. That is where the adoption of technology is again a big challenge in terms of how we do it. And last but not the least is typically problems where every entity has in this country. I mean, there are different challenges, whether it could be in terms of road issues or in terms of transport issues or very different labor issues and environmental activities. We need certain kind of a platform where these people can communicate their grievances and basically look at in terms of solving problems. And as you said, it's a unorganized and unorganized, and that is somewhere I think you need a lot of platforms to basically bring them into those kind of activities. So I think these are some of the things which I feel going forward. As for supply chains, yes, no doubt we need to be future ready infrastructures. We need responsive supply chains. We use a lot of technology and computing like edge computing and those kind of activities, and be responsive to bring about speed as well as prioritization and agile demand plan. So that these are basically in terms of some of the things I think going forward, uh, people will be more interested. You will see a lot of direct to door, that is direct to customers, D2C kind of involvement where goods will be shipped directly to the consumer. You're trying to expedite that drop shipping kind of activities where you remove those intermediaries and reduce the cost for basically an intermediary like a dealer or a distributor and try to directly move from. And there are a lot of things where companies are working to bring about better serviceability. I think these are some of the things which you can see going further, and a lot of areas which can help improve the processes further also.
Thank you, sir. I think I first want to say apology that I would have given such a long topic to say it in a nutshell. I think this becomes sometimes that is also one I then thank you so much for giving us a nutshell. Friends, if you have seen over an hour and 15 minutes what we have done in this session, this has not only helped us to understand the industry better, but also enhance our knowledge. And over the discussions, sir has taught me something very important, which I've started implementing at my workplace or even in life. Last mile, as he says, that last mile knowledge is very important. So last mile is not only a segment in supply chain or in logistics, but it's also that in depth whatever we know, we should know it, completely, and we should know it correctly. And that is what our teachers have taught us, and we should adhere to the same. This session, sir, I think while this was just the tip of the iceberg, I thank you for your valuable time and the efforts which you have taken to do this. I think. As we say, digital media is going to stay for a longer period than us, and this session will definitely, make impact in few of the lives because of the knowledge or decision making through the employment or decision making through their careers, students. So this is the entire, gamut of participants and friends and audience to do this session to do a pro bono, help in this pandemic about a certain industry. And will Knowlogy Karwaan focus on that? Sir will be there with us. So for all of you who wanted more, sir will be there with us in the forthcoming weeks and months. We want this industry not to cover it from one aspect. We will also bring experts, current experts in various leading companies from finance, operations, HR, production planning, procurement, in terms of digitalization, and sir will be there to ask them for on behalf of us to get more information and enlighten us in terms of this subject, because this subject requires a bit more extensive, is nothing short of a delight, enlightenment, and also in some in terms of so enriching to the knowledge database. And I envy to all the batches who have passed out from your college. what a wonderful teacher they had. That we in a short span we understood that your patience. And I've asked this question to sir as well, audience, that how can we always say, as you asked, unorganized. I always say supply chain people are always so violent, so out front, and why he comes with so much of. And he gave me a response to that, which I'll share in the next session when we start with the experts. But sir, bottom of my heart, I would like to say a big thank you. I would have, gone ahead and get this information I wanted to know personally, and your willingness to share with everybody says in all the kind of contribution you give to the society. I think at a large, this is most important, and I will ensure this recording goes to the last point of everybody so that everybody can value out of it. I hope you enjoyed the session as well, and again,
Yes.
big thanks for all your effort and the encouragement and support which you give to take this forward, sir. Sir, for
Thanks.
your last comments.
Thanks, Thanks, Ashish. It has been wonderful. Nostalgic in a way, in terms of as I started off in the industry, and that is what I told you also, that it was initially challenging when I started adapting this into teaching. Then I realized that this is what you've done across, and this is what you are able to share. And nothing is a bigger help than reading, trying to be in line with what's happening. And when you talked about the future series, that is where I was more excited. I said I will tell you so many things which are happening across, but it would be wonderful to hear from organizations, one, two, three small things what they are doing. So everyone would have two or three things what they are doing different, and that would be a huge encouragement both for the industry as well as I think for the budding aspiring students who are looking at in terms of a career, to look at in terms of there are plethora of avenues what one can look at, and it is not just one small activity, and where people can make themselves useful. And more importantly, it's a global platform. The processes remain the same globally, so it doesn't matter in which country you work and where you work, but there is a lot of job satisfaction I'm sure you can get, because there are diverse areas. So that is where I would like to leave it at. And Ashish, thank you very much to you and HR Sampark for making this possible. I hope it has helped demystify certain concepts and so forth. We look forward to the future sessions also. Thank you very much.
Sir, have a great week ahead, and thank you, audience, for participating. Be safe and
Thank you.
fine.
Thank you to all. Thank you all. Safe. Be safe. Be safe.